Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in again to our pre-concert video for the concert with Holland Symphony on November 2nd, 2024. And we're calling this concert Sounds of the Sea because 3 of the 4 pieces have something to do with water in their title. And this should be a really interesting concert. We'll say a lot more about each piece, but every single one of these pieces really challenges the orchestra to expand its color range. I think the orchestra as a whole, in terms of all the different instruments, it's a big orchestra with lots of extra woodwinds, contrabassoon, bass clarinet, English horn, piccolo, 2 harps, celeste, a real army of percussion instruments, but it also challenges each of us to use our instruments in some different ways. So we'll talk more about that as we go on. It's been interesting to learn all this music. Johannes, how did you happen to put all these pieces together? I've never even heard of some of these composers.
I know. It's quite different from some of our other programs. Overall, I would say there's a theme of descriptiveness of the concert, right? So not absolute music like what you would have in Mozart, Beethoven, or Brahms, but this music, just about all of the pieces, evoke images, right? It's sort of like going to the movies, right? And also, all works are written in the 20th century, and half of the pieces, 2 out of 4, are written by female composers. So, but there's also like a little element that harkens back to our Classics 1 concert, right? So you're going to notice that the Debussy La Mer piece, for example, harkens back to the Marx Idyll, uses some of the similar vocabulary, and also the Ravel Piano Concerto. Sort of there's a reference to the Gershwin American in Paris. So there is a little bit of a relationship there. Should I just launch into the Ana Lara a little bit?
Go ahead.
Okay, so that is a recent discovery. I heard about this piece a few years ago, even though it was written quite a number of years ago already. But in my exploration to find more female composers of color, I found this Ana Lara piece that was quite interesting, and I carefully programmed for Holland to not overstretch the audience. But even though it's very modern, it's quite accessible. So Ana Lara was born in Mexico in 1959, studied composition there, but also voice and piano. And she has written works for soloists, orchestras, chamber music, vocal pieces, also some electroacoustic compositions, traditional orchestral pieces, operas, even musical theater. She also loves to collaborate with dance. So there's a certain improvisatory element to her music that's suited for interpretation by dance. But overall, a very well-rounded composer that is just now coming into the uh, limelight of composers that are done more. She's basically known as one of Mexico's most prominent contemporary composers, mainly because her work blends a wide range of influences, right? There's even some elements of Mexican folklore, modernist techniques, and even some mystical themes, right? So the title, Angels of Fire and Ice, suggests sort of a spiritual realm governed by 2 contrasting elements, right? So you've got fire and ice, fire, the symbol of passion, creation, destruction, and then that contrasts with ice, often seen as a metaphor for stillness, death, or even clarity. And so in many cultures, fire and ice represent opposing yet interdependent forces, right? Like yin and yang, that together define the structure of the universe. So in Ana Lara's hands, these elements take on more symbolic meaning since they became sonic forces. And so that's on immediate display in the opening movement. It's not a traditional sonata form or anything like that. It's more like musical episodes, right? But there are 3 or 4 distinct ones, right? So it starts off with bursts of fiery energy, strings, brass create this swirling texture, evoking images of flames. There's sort of a rhythmic motives that are driven by the prominent percussion that is displayed in front of the orchestra, right? You need 7 percussionists to do this piece. And so representing sort of the fire. And then the music transitions to a section that's more dominated by stillness and clarity, and that's representing ice. So the orchestra shifts into a more transparent texture. The harmonies are more static, almost like if you need a romantic equivalent, like Venus, for example, in the Planets by Holst. It's kind of very still, sort of, you can't really touch it. It's meditative, right? And then number three, you sort of move into this conflict, right? As the piece progresses, the two elemental forces begin to interact more directly. But rather than remaining in opposition, they start to bleed into one another and feed on each other. And then the last bit is the transformation, where the music undergoes a transformation where the two elements begin to merge. So the harsh dissonance from the beginning of the fire becomes more consonant, and the cold harmonies of the ice grow warmer. And then the orchestration becomes richer. The strings are a little bit more lyrically or sweeping. And then it's a little bit more meditative with a sense of resolution and peace. So peace is more narrative, sonic landscape, and less, counterpoint and motives. It's more like an experience, a sonic experience that the listener will undergo. So it's kind of interesting, right? So does this piece call for a lot of extra techniques you have to do in the strings?
This calls for some interesting moments.
Okay.
Um, a lot of what we call harmonics, which is basically manipulating the string to vibrate in a different way, and it produces a different sound, and in fact does some different pitches than would ordinarily come out if we put our fingers in certain places. So there's a lot of sliding around of those harmonics. There are spots to me that sound just like seagulls, for example, in the Dawn movement. I don't know if that's what she was going for, but that's immediately what I heard. Um, there are moments of just really low sustained notes in the lower strings. Um, yeah, there's some interesting technique here, some scales that we do as a section, but we're divided into 3 or 4 parts, and we do those scales a note off. So it sounds like this kind of slightly chaotic sweep up into a place where we all land on the same note, and then we sort of all come together in some sort of piece. So there's some really interesting sounds. I like to imagine what she was trying to imitate, if she was trying to imitate something. Yeah, I think she also sort of meant for this to be sort of a reflection on the passage of time, the names of the 4 angels, darkness, dawn, light, and sunset. So whether she's envisioning that as sort of a cosmic cycle of life or each human life, but she's definitely reflecting on time. Actually got the title from a series of poems by Francisco Serrano. Um, so I don't think she's not really trying to portray those poems vividly, but definitely reflecting on those poems, asking big questions about life and death and the cosmos. Um, to me, given my background, when it begins, I hear this echo of sort of in the beginning, in the primordial chaos and nothingness, and it just grows from there. And it's quite a wonderful piece. I've really enjoyed getting to know it. And I understand there's a connection. She's got a connection to Long Beach. The,
Um,
the
the Long Beach,
conductor,
the Long Beach Symphony, Eckhart Toy, they have done this piece, and he's a proponent of hers. He does lots of pieces by Klein. So
yeah,
yeah, Eckhart is
Anna Lara.
Anna Lara, yeah, but he also does Klein, actually. So he looks around, and he does more diversity in terms of programming. Yeah, Eckhart is a good friend. So I enjoy seeing what he programs and how the orchestra wrestles with that music, because when we talk about evoking a little chaos and playing like a step off, that's hard to do because the orchestra strives to play in consonance, and they try to be together. So sometimes when they're written to purposely not be together, that's hard for the
Yeah, very
orchestra
hard.
because they
Well,
like to
I think
sound.
I think perhaps a while ago the conductor of the National Symphony in Mexico also spent some time working with the Long Beach Symphony. So I think they even commissioned a work from her together. So I thought maybe that was how you got to know the name of this composer and her works.
Well, we have a large Latinx and also Mexican population here in Long Beach. So the Long Beach Symphony tries to reflect some of the citizens and the people who subscribe to the concerts. So it's a great effort that they do in terms of diversifying their programming. So I enjoy reading what they come up with.
Mhm. So that'll be a really fun, interesting beginning to the program. From there, we go to the Ravel Piano Concerto in G major, which was written in 1932, with I can say this, with our favorite pianist, Andrew Lee, taking the solo part. Um, this is a really fun follow-up to the Gershwin we did in September. Ravel and Gershwin were sort of fans of each other. Gershwin, excuse me, wanted to study with Ravel, but Ravel kind of took a look at his work and asked him how much he was making and said, "Why do you want to study with me? I should study with you." Didn't want Gershwin to become kind of a second-rate Ravel, really thought Gershwin should work on nurturing his own voice, and we're so glad he did. There are people who think of this Ravel concerto as sort of the sequel to Rhapsody in Blue or Gershwin's concerto. There are definite three movements. It's not a terribly long concerto, but there are three distinct movements, and the first and last definitely borrow a lot from Gershwin. Definitely the jazzy riffs and the clarinet and the trumpet and the trombone slides like you'd hear in Gershwin. Kind of some fanfares, bluesy notes. Ravel had definite thoughts about what a concerto should be. He didn't think it should be some really weighty, serious thing like Brahms was writing. He wanted it to be light, to be fun. He thought about calling this a divertimento. He thought should be something to showcase the skills of the soloist. So he wrote this for a smaller orchestra. This is about the smallest orchestra on the size of the orchestra on the program. It's sort of a Mozart-sized orchestra, maybe slightly bigger than that. It begins with, it almost sounds like a circus or a carnival. It's just fun. It's slightly crazy sounding in that just super excited, energetic carnival sort of a way. Lots of interesting instruments. The piccolo gets a huge part. The English horn gets a huge part. The strings tend to play little riffs here and there. We don't carry the melody as much as we do in some pieces. It really goes for this whole concert. But it's a lot of fun. And you know, Drew has been working really hard and is really excited to come and play with us again. It's been a while. Last time he was here, he did Gershwin, so it's very appropriate that he's doing Ravel this time.
Yeah, this is just about the only piece where we have sort of a traditional form, right? Yes, it's still descriptive, you know, of sort of this marketplace craziness. And also the first movement opens with a whip crack. You don't often get that, right? You get the two wood blocks, you know, as a whip, and you know, there. I don't think there's another piece that opens like that. So it's sort of like a slap in the face, kind of, and then the piece starts. So it's super innovative, but then again, Ravel being sort of conservative in terms of form, you know, does a traditional three movement sort of piano concerto. But you know, one of my favorite movements is actually the second one. So in stark contrast to the first movement, it offers sort of this moment of introspection. It's very lyrical, emotionally profound. So I do enjoy that a lot. It just gives a nice break from the craziness from the outer movements. But it's one of my favorite concertos to do. So I'm glad we got Andrew to come back to Holland to play with us again.
So Ravel wrote this basically the same time he was writing another piano concerto, that one just for the left hand. He'd been commissioned by someone who had lost the use of his right hand to write a concerto for the left hand. I'm wondering, Johannes, if you've ever conducted that one.
I have not. There are some pianists who specialize. You know, there's some pianists who still have both hands, but they do enjoy these pieces, and they just kind of do the left hand concerto. But I've never actually done it.
Okay, I haven't
Yeah.
either.
Hmm.
So then after Ravel, we turned to another name that was brand new for me, Anna Klein, who's a British composer who composed the piece Restless Oceans, which sounds like a really good opener to the grand piece by Debussy called La Mer, which is, of course, the French of the sea. So Restless Oceans is another piece that obviously references the ocean, some very different goals. And I will say this piece asks a lot of the orchestra. Um, I don't know. We haven't gotten together and practiced it yet. I don't know if people will appreciate what Johannes and Anna Klein are asking us to do in this piece. Um, I was scouring around YouTube to look for a performance and discovered a performance by Johannes's University Orchestra, which we will link on the Holland Symphony website. All of these pieces, we have listening links in the program notes. So if you'd like to hear them, you can go to the program notes. This piece also is based on a poem, and we'll have that poem in the program notes as well. Johannes, why don't you tell us a little bit more about where this one came from and why you like this piece?
Yeah, so you know, as you mentioned, I programmed this with my university orchestra because I thought it might be fun, you know, for the orchestra to do extra things. And then it was such a success that, you know, I'm bringing it to Holland. So it's based on, you know, another female composer, but it's based on a powerful celebration of feminine strength, it says, right? But it's inspired by the words of the suffragette and activist Maya Angelou. And so it says, each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it, without claiming it, she stands up for all women, right? And at the end, the orchestra actually stands up. So it's this kind of interesting. The reference to the ocean is that the orchestra surges and recedes, kind of like waves, with some layered textures. So sort of getting the image of waves. But this is constructed in one single movement. The piece is only 4 minutes, you know, maybe 5 minutes long. It's very short. There's no traditional form to it. Anne Klein said about herself, writing this piece, and I quote, "I composed Restless Oceans for Maren Alsop. Those you may know, she was she is the music director of the Baltimore Symphony. I think she just recently gave it up, but she is maybe the most prominent female conductor in the United States. And so she wrote this for the performance at the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos. The piece received its world premiere at the opening ceremony in Davos in 2019, where Maren Alsop was presented with the forum's prestigious Crystal Award in recognition of her championship in diversity in music. So in addition to playing their instruments, the musicians are also called to use their voices in song and strong vocalizations. And you have to stomp your feet. And at the very end, we all stand up united on the last chord. So her intention was to write a defiant piece that embraces the power of women. So we're going to try to do our best to stomp and play at the same time. That turned out to be somewhat challenging, but also fun.
Sometimes we have to stomp and play and sing at the same time. So that's going to test some of us who can only do maybe one or two things at a time.
We'll grow into it.
We'll see if we can manage all that. Yeah, so that piece is something that alternates between sounding a little bit like the Rite of Spring, and then so that kind of angular type of music then alternates with a much more lyrical, the flowing, maybe that's the ocean waves coming in and flowing in and out. But it goes back and forth a couple times. It's short, maybe a little bit of a stretch for some people, including some of us in the orchestra. But we invite you to just bring your curiosity and enjoy that. And if nothing else, enjoy watching us try to do all 3 or 4 things at a time. That piece too asks a lot of the musicians in terms of doing some different things, not just stomping and singing, but some different kinds of playing. So most of the pieces in this concert ask a lot of the musicians, and especially the La Mer, the final piece of the program. So that's by probably the best known composer on this program, Claude Debussy. He wrote this piece between 1903 and 1905. And what I didn't realize is this is really his 7th main orchestral piece. So he had not written a lot of pieces for orchestra. And this was a bit of a departure for him. Much of what he'd written before this was sort of the Debussy that we tend to think of when you think of the name Debussy. pieces like Prelude to the on the Afternoon of a Faun, a very light, transparent, delicate. Much of this is a much more robust sounding orchestra. Um, he loved the sea. He loved to vacation by the sea. I think he was fascinated by the many moods of the sea, and made a number of trips to England, crossing on the English Channel. So didn't have massive ocean voyage experiences, but had been out on the water quite a bit, including one pretty perilous journey on the sea. A lot of what he did in England was go to see artwork. And he was especially fascinated by artistic depictions of the sea. Loved the Impressionists in the way they tried to capture the sea. So much in the way that some of those painters did, he really tried to paint three pictures of different moods of the sea. So while this sort of functions as a symphony, it's got three movements that are different characters overall. It's much more about pictures of elements of the sea. So you've got the kind of smooth water on top and the really surging energy underneath, or the sparkles of the splashes, the storm that is threatening to come in the distance. It's definitely a different type of a piece to practice. Violins, we're used to having the tune and the melody, and playing a lot of melodies. And here, in the beginning, when it's just depicting the beginning of the dawn, we just get little snippets of melodic fragments that just start to show themselves as if sort of emerging out of the dark of the early morning. So we have fewer melodies that go on for a long time, but we're adding to the colors. It's quite a remarkable piece. It's a new piece for me to play. It's been a challenge to learn some different vocabulary. Very high playing down to very low playing quickly, so we have to really know how to get around the fingerboard pretty fast. Have you conducted this before, and what's fun, or what's interesting or tricky about it?
Yeah, I've done it before. So it's kind of a pillar of 20th century music, especially Impressionism. This was kind of a game changer piece. When this emerged, some people found it not playable. Like when you come with a mindset of of Brahms, it's very, very different. It's not about the notes, it's more about the effects and the overall gestalt, I would say. What I like about it is, and there's a reference to Holland, Michigan. When I come to during the year, very different seasons, I enjoy the most the two fall concerts, right? September and October, because I can see the fall coming, and Lake Michigan gets a little bit more stormy, sometimes darker. So there is an element, even though it's not the ocean, Lake Michigan can be very powerful. So the descriptiveness of the first movement, so tranquil and like you say, just the snippets of melodic fragments. And then in the second movement, you get this more dynamic, playful nature of the sea, right? The swirling rhythms and this constant motion and changing patterns of the waves. And then the third section, is this dramatic interplay between wind and sea, right? The dialogue, it's the title, is Dialogue of the Wind and Sea. So kind of a tumultuous relationship between, wind and water, and a sense of power, right? So anybody who has been on Lake Michigan in stormy sea with a little sailboat will probably get that sense of power. Um, and storms and crashing waves. Yeah, what I like about it is it's less about, so many times when we practice symphonies, it's about rhythms, clean notes, intonation has to be perfect, the balance has to be perfect. So we work on different things, right? In this program, we get to work a little bit more musically and a little bit more wholesomely, and less about notes and rhythms. That's still important, but it's more about shapes, and it's a different kind of work environment. And I thought it would be good for the orchestra to embrace some of that repertoire and to expand our color palette, and also offer this music to the audience in Holland. I think We have done images before by Debussy. It's quite a bit easier, it has the movements, clouds, But I think this is sort of the granddaddy of impressionistic pieces, right? La Mer is a complicated piece, so it's another testament to Holland Symphony's growth to be able to do this repertoire. So I'll be very excited to work on this with the musicians. Hopefully they'll have a good time too, and they don't feel like I'm bringing harder and harder repertoire to them.
No, what I hear from the musicians is that people are working hard and people are excited about embracing these new challenges and learning some new pieces. And excited to see all of you and play for all of you. We expect another very full house, and it should be a really exciting concert.
Great. We look forward to seeing everyone.
So thank you again for watching with us all the way to the end. If you want to read more, you can read the program notes. We have listening links. You can listen to all 4 of the pieces there. Some of them are videos. We try to choose videos that sort of showcase the instruments that are playing, that are fun to watch. There aren't videos available for all the pieces, but as many as possible, we have videos. And we encourage you to think of questions ahead of time and send us your questions, and let's see if we can stump Johannes after intermission with some really good questions. So thank you all for watching. We'll see you in November.
Thank you.